Well, again, welcome everyone. 2 days from today begins the new year, 2024, on our Gregorian calendars. I'm off to a bad start here. But 22 is about to become history. Now, tomorrow night, New Year's Eve, is known as a time to party and ring in the new year. There are many other customs associated with the new year. Customs like making New Year's resolutions, maybe kissing at midnight as we transition to the new year, and of course there are big parties on New Year's Eve. We'll get to those a little later today. But does it seem a bit odd to us that our year begins in winter, when really nothing's going on? That really wouldn't seem to make any sense. The first day on most calendars, maybe other than the Gregorian, seem to have some type of major event attached to them. For example, around 3100 BC, the Egyptians noticed that the constellation Canis Major means the greater dog in Latin, by the way, this constellation rose next to the sun right at dawn at the same time every year. And this was roughly the same time the Nile River flooded each year. We might know the constellation Canis Major contains the star Sirius. Now, Sirius is the brightest star visible in the northern hemisphere and is very prominent in our night sky. And yes, I am serious. Not the star, but my demeanor. Anyway, ancient Egyptian legends associate Sirius with hot weather. With the sun during the day and then the arrival of the bright star Sirius at night, well, these two brightest stars combine to produce the heat of mid to late summer. Well, at least that's what the Egyptians believed. Now, the Egyptians depended on the annual flooding of the Nile each year so that their crops would grow. And they began their calendar, their new year, on what we call August 15th today. At that time, the Egyptians began a 2-week celebration beginning on August 15th called Wafa el Nile. Now, the ancient Egyptians believed that their god Osiris, here we go with another pagan god, it seems to be common these days. The ancient Egyptians believed that their god Osiris had been killed by Set. Now, many believe Set to have actually been Seth, one of the sons of Noah. And they believed that the Nile flooded every year because the goddess Isis cried for her husband Osiris, who had been killed by Set. They believed that the tears of Isis would one day somehow restore the dead body of Osiris. Anyway, they began to observe Wafa el Nile for 2 weeks every year, and many still do today. Now, I wonder if those celebrating Wafa el Nile today really do believe that the tears of the goddess Isis will bring back or resurrect the dead Osiris. Or maybe they just continue to blindly follow others, not really knowing why they're celebrating Wafa el Nile for 2 weeks. Anyway, the ancient Egyptian calendar had its year begin on what we call August 15th, to commemorate the annual flooding of the Nile that brought them food out of what would otherwise have been a desert. Now, if we were to decide when the new year began, what day would we choose? We make our first day on our new calendars begin on August 15th to celebrate the flooding of the Nile? Here in the United States, probably not. But any ideas? When would be a good time to begin an annual calendar? Well, in the past, many people grew crops and raised livestock. In fact, most people were farmers of some kind. It was mainly an agrarian society. I grew up on a farm myself. Farmers begin their growing season in the spring when warmer temperatures arrive. Of course, there's also more daylight, and spring showers are good for newly planted crops. That would certainly seem to be a logical time to begin a new year, at the beginning of a new growing season. So we might begin our calendars at the beginning of spring. And of course, they would then end at the same time next year when the winter harvest was finished and a new growing season began. And that would coincide roughly with the spring equinox. So our growing season would begin around the time of the vernal equinox. And that takes place on our calendars today on around March 20th or 21st. Well, many ancient calendars had their first day begin on the vernal equinox. Even today, the calendars used in Iran and Afghanistan begin their new year on the vernal equinox. Many ancient civilizations began their calendar year based on the growing season starting in the spring of the year, at least in the northern hemisphere. So what about God's calendar? Well, God gave us a calendar so we would know when to observe his appointed times, for one thing. And God's given us an annual calendar based on the sun and the moon. And like many of the other ancient calendars, this calendar is based on the growing season. It has months, or you might call them months, that correspond to the position of the moon. And each new moon begins the new month, or what we might call month, on God's calendar. The new moon is always day one of the new month. Now, about 15 days later, the moon will be full, and about 15 days after that, the moon will be close to being new again. That's a total of 30 days, which is close to the actual lunar cycle. But the moon actually appears to complete one orbit around the Earth in approximately 29 and a half days. So some months will have 30 days and some actually 29. But God's calendar corrects itself. At every new moon, the cycle begins again. And if we lose track of what day of the month it is, well, we can come very close to knowing which day it is by just looking at the moon. Think about that. If the moon was at first quarter, we'd be around day 7. Last quarter would make it around day 23, and other days of the month could be determined by the phases of the moon as well as by its rising and setting time. And at the next new moon, the month would begin all over again, correcting any errors that may have occurred. So to keep track of the date on God's calendar, we really don't need a watch or some other mechanical or electronic timepiece. The moon becomes our timepiece to determine the days of our months, just as God promised in Genesis 1:14, where he said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." But of course, with a monthly cycle lasting about 29 and a half days, 12 months would account for only 354 days per year. That would be 11 days short of the actual year. An extra month, the 13th month of the year, is inserted 7 times during a 19-year period to correct this. Let's turn to Exodus 12, verse 1, if you would. That's Exodus chapter 12, verse 1. Every 19 years, the lunar cycle returns to where it was 19 years previously. And it's easy to determine the day of the month, assuming we can agree on exactly when a new moon occurs. But what about the beginning of the year on God's calendar? Look at Exodus 12, verse 1. "And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you." So here we see God tell the Israelites which month would be the first month of the year to them, but it doesn't specifically tell us exactly when the year begins. Verse 3. "Speak you unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house of their fathers, a lamb per a house." If we keep reading in chapter 12, we see that this is speaking of preparing the Passover. Now, this is also the time, of course, for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It's observed from the 15th day of the first month until the 21st day of the first month. The new moon is day 1 of any given month, as we said earlier. But when does that first month of the year begin? Let's turn over to Leviticus 23, if you would. Leviticus 23 and verse 4. Leviticus 23, verse 4. So, how do we know when the first month of the year starts? When is that? It seems the Bible doesn't directly tell us. But again, Leviticus 23, verse 4 says, "These are the feasts, or the appointed times of the Lord, even holy convocations, which you shall proclaim in their seasons, or appointed times. In the 14th day of the first month, and even is the Lord's Passover." So again, we see that the Passover is to be observed during the first month of the year. Verse 6. "And on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread unto the Lord. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. In the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein. So this is the first annual high holy day of the year. Verse 8. But you shall offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord 7 days. And the seventh day is a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein. If you would hold your place here in Leviticus 23, hang on to that if you would. We see in verse 8 that the seventh day of this feast is to be the second annual holy day or appointment of God, his annual appointment. This would give us a holy day on the 15th day of the first month, and 7 days later on the 21st day of the first month. Let's turn, if you would, to Exodus 34, verse 18. That's Exodus 34, verse 18. But again, when does the first month of God's calendar begin? We know that the Feast of Unleavened Bread occurs in the first month, the beginning of God's year. Again, Exodus 34, verse 18. The Feast of Unleavened Bread shall you keep. 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread, as I commanded you, in the time of the month Abib. For the month Abib, thus you came out of Egypt. So we see that we're to keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread in the month of Abib. Now, the word Abib means the greening of the grain. So why is this important? Well, during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the first grain bundle or sheaf from the spring barley harvest was required to be waved before God. If the first month of the year came too early, then the grain would not be ripe. And about a month later after ripening, the barley grain would be a bit too ripe and begin to fall over. Therefore, the barley had to be harvested in a fairly narrow window of time, and that time roughly corresponds to the beginning of spring. And that's when God's new year would begin, at the new moon when the barley was greening. However, each lunar cycle takes about 29 and a half days to complete, as we said. With 12 months accounting for only 354 days, the beginning of the year would occur about 11 days earlier than the previous year. That happens every year. After just a few years of the 12 months or months of 29 and a half days, the new year would begin in the winter, before the barley was ready for harvest, well before that. And of course, that would make it impossible for the priest to have that first sheaf to be waved. So back to Leviticus 23. Hope you held your place there. And we're going to look at verse 11. That's Leviticus 23, verse 11. And he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted for you. On the morrow after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. Now again, this was to be done in the first month of the year on God's calendar. And this, of course, foreshadowed the first of the first fruits to be accepted by God. That is who? That would be Jesus Christ, of course, right? So, should the start of the year drift back into winter, a calendar would have to be adjusted, of course. A 13th month would be added. Then, by the following month, it would be spring and the barley would be ready. So the first month on God's calendar was set to occur in the spring or at the time of the early barley harvest. Now, we should probably talk more about God's calendar in the future. There is some debate as to exactly how we're to determine the beginning of God's year. But for now, we can just understand that God's calendar is based on the growing season, as were many other ancient calendars that ran from spring to spring. And also that our growing season and our harvest, at least again in the Northern Hemisphere, are an analog to God's children, growing to become mature in the faith until our harvest time comes at the return of Jesus Christ and at the last day, when we will be brought into God's great kingdom. That's his harvest. It's an analog. So what about the calendar we use here in the United States? And it's also used by most of the world today. Well, most today use the Gregorian calendar. Now, this was a revision of the earlier Julian calendar in an attempt to improve its accuracy. The Julian calendar, as it turns out, lost 11 hours and 14 seconds every year. That may not sound like much, but in 100 years it lost over 1,000 hours, equaling over 46 days. Within the Julian calendar itself was based on an earlier Roman calendar that was alleged to have been based on even earlier calendars. So these things evolved over time. But the origin of what is now the Gregorian calendar actually began on the spring equinox when the growing season began. Did we know that? I didn't know that. Also, something else I didn't know, January and February were not part of the original calendar. Yeah, they weren't there. In the earlier calendar, there were only 10 months in the year. And after the 10 months were over, the winter, well, it really didn't have its own months. They just waited till spring. Now, the first day of the new year at that time was March 1st. That was the first month in the year. And of course, the first day signaled the first of the year. But then the second Roman king, Numa Pompilius, added 2 months to the calendar at the end of the year. He put those 2 months in. They were kind of missing. And what did he name these 2 brand new months? Anyone? January and February. Now again, these are at the end of the year, not the beginning. It's still March. The month of February was named for the Roman festival of Februalia, if I pronounced that right. From the website, learnreligions.com/the Roman Februalia Festival, quote, the festival known as Februalia was held near the end of the Roman calendar year, and to understand how the holiday changed over time, it helps a bit to know the calendar's history. Originally, the Roman year had only 10 months. They counted out 10 months between March and December, and basically disregarded the dead months of what we know now as January and February, end quote. With only 10 months in the original year, if you think about this, sept means 7, right? That's a prefix for 7. And so September was the 7th month of the year. Oct means what, number-wise? 8. Think of the number of tentacles an octopus has, for example. And so October was the 8th month of the year. Nov and OV implies the number 9. And so November was the 9th month of the year. And of course, Dec represents 10. Think of a decade. And so December represented the 10th month of the year. But originally, as I said, the months of January and February were not in the calendar. Get back to the article. Quote, later the Etruscans came along and added these 2 months back into the equation. In fact, they planned to make January the first month, but the expulsion of the Etruscan dynasty prevented this from happening, and so March 1st was considered to be the first day of the year. February was dedicated to Februus, a god not unlike Dis or Pluto, because it was the month in which Rome was purified by making offerings and sacrifices to the gods of the dead. Now, eventually, January did become the first day of the year and not March. So from Britannica.com, quote, we can partly thank the Roman king Numa Pompilius. According to tradition, during his reign, Numa revised the Roman Republican calendar so that January replaced March as the first month. It was a fitting choice, since January was named after Janus, the Roman god of all beginnings, and March celebrated Mars, the god of war. However, there is evidence that January 1 was not made the official start of the Roman year until 153 BCE. Now, of course, when January and February became the first 2 months of the year, September, October, November, December, the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th months of the year, well, they then became the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th months of the year, respectively. And really, their names no longer made any sense, at least not in a numerical sense. I always wondered how those numerical names of the month got out of order. Well, now we know, right? Okay. Now, there's a little more to this, but due to the drifting of the earlier inaccurate calendars, the spring equinox had drifted away from March 1st and closer to the end of the month. For the new Gregorian calendar, 11 days were removed from the Julian calendar to try to correct the errors, but this still left the equinox occurring around the 21st day of March. Sound familiar? Well, after January and February were added to the existing calendar, January 1 became the first day of the new year. Now, some of us are told that that New Year's Day represents the day that Jesus Christ was circumcised, coming on the 8th day of his life as a human being. Of course, being born on December the 25th. It makes sense. It adds up. Of course, there's a little problem with that because we know that Jesus was not born on December 25th anyway. And January 1st really has, well, no significance at all, as far as I can tell. Now, you'll want to study this for yourselves. It really gets a bit complicated with the changes to the calendar over thousands of years, but you might want to check that out. I found it very interesting. But the bottom line is that the first day of the year, January 1st, signifies really no single event, or growing season, or flooding of the Nile, not anything really. But despite having no relation to anything, New Year's Day and New Year's Eve do have traditions that are observed today. Now, what are the origins of some of those traditions? Are they biblical? Or might they be associated with the ways of the heathen, the ways they serve their gods? Let's take a look. What about the ball drop in Times Square every year at midnight as we transition to the new year? Well, from the website bhg.com, quote, "The tradition of using balls to tell time has been around for centuries, dating back to the early 1800s. The first documented time ball was on top of England's Royal Observatory at Greenwich, where it would drop at 1 p.m. each afternoon as a way to let nearby ships and boats know what time it was. This was before watches or cell phones, so the ball dropping was the primary way to tell time. So for the big New Year's Eve celebration at Times Square, a time ball is a natural way to symbolize one period ending and another beginning. The very first Times Square New Year's Eve celebration took place on December 31st, 1904. But there was no ball drop that year. The event was organized by Adolph Ochs, the owner of the New York Times. The newspaper had just opened its headquarters in Times Square, and Ochs wanted a memorable way to ring in the new year and celebrate the newspaper's milestones. That year, 200,000 people gathered in the streets of New York City to celebrate. Each year after the 1904 event, Ochs organized bigger and more elaborate New Year's Eve parties in Times Square. In December of 1907, he commissioned a large New Year's Eve ball that would be lowered as the crowd counted down to midnight. The ball was made of iron and wood and weighed over 700 pounds. The official Waterford Crystal Times Square New Year's Eve ball, the one that's used today, is decorated with modern LED lighting. The ball measures 6 feet across and weighs more than 11,000 pounds. The computerized lighting technology can display more than 16,000 colors and patterns, which is why the ball has a different display each year." End quote. Well, things we didn't know. Now, many today observe the changing of one year to another on our modern Gregorian calendar. And whether they watch a ball drop in Times Square or perhaps just watch a clock to observe the beginning of a new year. But now we use God's calendar to meet on his appointed times, for Bible prophecy, or in short, for anything on God's timetable. But as our Bibles tell us, we're in the world, but not actually of it. But whether we like it or not, I suppose, our lives are greatly affected by the modern Gregorian calendar. It's used for tax purposes. The new year begins a new tax season. Now, for example, we need to send out statements concerning the past year's contribution at year's end. But if you would turn to Matthew 5, verse 14. Matthew chapter 5, verse 14. Matthew 5, verse 14. Let's suppose we could all retreat and live in a commune and ignore man's Gregorian calendar. I'm not sure that's possible. But I think our Bibles tell us to go into all the world. In fact, in Mark 16, verse 15, Jesus told his disciples, "Go you into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." And we're told to be the light of the world. Again, Matthew 5, verse 14. And these are the words of Christ. "You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it gives light unto all that are in the house. It almost appears that verse 16 looks like a commandment to me, but see what you think. Verse 16. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Now, we hide from the world, we can't do what Jesus asked of his disciples. And if we're in the world, we need to use the modern Gregorian calendar in addition to God's calendar. Now, speaking of taxes, as I did earlier, Jesus tells us to pay our taxes and obey our governments, at least until they ask us to break God's law. And again, our tax year is based on the Gregorian calendar. We need to use this calendar to actually function in the world today. So, a bottom line here is that while we need to keep God's calendar, and especially his appointed times, we must at the same time observe the modern Gregorian calendar. However, I'm sure you knew this was coming. There are some things about the New Year observances that true Christians should avoid. I happened to be having dinner with my family once. It just happened to be New Year's Day. We had invited a friend of the family over to have dinner with us. And, they brought a dish to share, which was nice of them. I can't remember exactly what all was in it, but I do know it had black-eyed peas and pork. Now, our guest stated that eating this dish containing the black-eyed peas and pork on January 1st would bring us good luck for the rest of the year. This person, identifying as a Christian, by the way, was suggesting that the way to peace and good luck was to eat a certain dish, in this case, black-eyed peas and pork to be specific, on the first day of this man-defined year. Of course, do black-eyed peas and pork have the power to give us good fortune, particularly if we eat them on the first day of the year? What do we think? Well, actually, to me, this would seem like idolatry, to believe that something like a certain food or foods would cause us to have good luck or good fortune. Now, food might keep us nourished, but it really has no power to determine our luck or our peace and fortune for the next year. If we really want to be blessed in the coming year, what should true Christians do? Well, I think prayer to the true God would likely help, especially if we combine that with keeping his commandments as he's asked us to do. I think that's how we should go about seeking God's blessings. That's our God, of course. But why would anyone even suggest something like this, especially a Christian? I mean, where did they get this idea? But we'll see shortly, so hang in there. We'll get to it. From the website, thescribesportion.com, and from an article titled, The Pagan Origin of New Year's Day, quote, humans have celebrated the start of the new year for thousands of years. In most cases, these celebrations were linked to agricultural and astronomical events. The earliest recorded New Year's Day celebration was 4,000 years ago in Babylon, of all places. It took place during the first new moon following the vernal equinox. Yes, the new year actually begins in spring, not winter. This was so because there was an equal amount of sunlight and darkness heralding the start of a new year and representing the rebirth of the natural world. To mark the new year, the Babylonians celebrated a festival called Akitu. It derives from the Sumerian word for barley. Isn't that interesting? The festival lasted 11 days, and a different ritual was conducted on each day. Statues of the gods were paraded throughout the streets as rites were conducted to symbolize their victory over the forces of chaos. They believed that through these rites, the world was cleansed and recreated by the gods in preparation for the new year and the return of spring. The principal god celebrated during this festival was Marduk. Remember him? Marduk, Babylonian sun god. Marduk was celebrated for his mythical victory over the evil sea goddess Tiamat. During Akitu, the new king was crowned, or the current monarch's rule extended. The king practiced a public ritual of humiliation during which he was brought before the statue of Marduk. He was stripped of his robes, slapped, and dragged by the ears in the hope of making him cry. If he cried, this was seen as a sign that Marduk was satisfied and extended his rule. The modern celebration of New Year's Day originates, though, from the Roman celebration of the god Janus. This god's full name is Janus Bifrons, meaning the god who looked both ways. It explains why Janus has two faces as a representation of his ability to look back into the past and forward into the future. This idea was tied to the concept of transition from one year to the next, from one vision to the next, and growth into adulthood. He was also worshipped at the beginning of the harvest season, planting times, marriages, births, deaths, etc. Romans celebrated January 1st by offering sacrifices to Janus in the hopes of gaining good fortune in the new year. And I think we'll see that many of our New Year's traditions are based on looking to false gods to bless us in the coming year. I noticed that when I went through this, but let's continue with the same quote. They decorated their homes with laurel branches and spent the day partying. It was common for friends and family to exchange well wishes and gift figs and honey. Gifts were exchanged because they believed the beginning of anything was an omen for the whole. Kissing, at the moment of transition into the next year, is rooted in pagan sexual practice and superstition. Let's end there, end quote. Now also concerning this midnight kiss on New Year's Eve, we've heard of that, especially when we were younger probably. According to Daniel Compora, Ph.D., an associate professor of English language and literature at the University of Toledo, where he teaches courses on folklore, quote, that's what he said, this kiss is part of both English and German folklore, which indicate that whoever a person is with at midnight portends what type of luck they will have for the rest of the year, close quote. So again, we're trying to get lucky, if you will, one way or another. Anyway, so maybe it's not the black-eyed peas and the pork we eat on New Year's Day, but rather it might be who we kiss at the beginning of the new year that determines our luck for the next year. Well, back to the article briefly. Watch night services were conducted to watch out for evil spirits who were believed to roam the earth during those times. Hence comes the tradition of staying up to ring in the new year. More on ringing in the new year in just a minute. Continuing. Here we go. This still his quote. Eating pork and black-eyed peas on New Year's Day originates from homage to Janus. His mythological wife, Karna, was honored during her festival with a dish of fava beans and pork bacon. The peas or beans symbolize rebirth, and pork or swine was the preferred sacrificial meat to the gods. Not our God, their gods. And so there you have it. That's where the black-eyed peas and the pork came from. Who would have known? But, on second hand, it all seems to go back to, paganism every time. But anyway, continuing the quote still, and I'll end in a second. In an attempt to Christianize January celebrations, the Catholic Church created the Feast of the Circumcision. We talked about that. Supposedly, this day venerated Christ's 8th day of life, following Jewish tradition, end quote. Of course, as we said, we know that Christ was not born in the winter, nor was he circumcised in the winter. So back to that ringing in the new year. Where does it originate? Where does that phrase originate, ringing in the new year? Off on the website, mentalfloss.com, in an article titled, Why Do We Ring in the New Year? Quote, communities used to bid adieu to the old year and welcome the new one by ringing bells, often in churches. The tradition may have grown out of other occasions where bells marked an end, passing bells, told when someone died, or celebrated a beginning like wedding bells. Wall Street's Trinity Church rang in the new year with a veritable concert put on by the church's official bell ringer, James E. Iliff. As the New York Herald reported in 1860, there floated from the high church tower the stirring music of 8 bells, chiming in changes and making the air redolent with harmony. According to Trinity Church's archives, the earliest mention of the tradition is from the minutes of an 1801 meeting where parishioners allotted £8 to the person who rang the bells on New Year's Day. It might have been going on long before that, considering the church got its first bell back in 1698. In short, ringing bells was once a central part of the holiday. The fact that it faded from memory and ringing the new year makes little sense if we don't know the phrase's history might help explain why so many people now say, bring in the new year instead. Okay. What about New Year's resolutions? About resolutions of the new year. Where'd that come from? Well, from an article at history.com, quote, the ancient Babylonians, here we go again. The ancient Babylonians are said to have been the first people to make New Year's resolutions some 4,000 years ago. They were also the first to hold recorded celebrations in honor of the new year. They also made promises to their gods to pay their debts and return any objects they'd borrowed. These promises could be considered the forerunners of our New Year's resolutions. If the Babylonians kept to their word, their pagan gods would bestow favor on them for the coming year. If not, they would fall out of the gods' favor, a place no one wanted to be. End quote. Yet again, we see people trying to gain favor by appeasing false gods on the first day of the year. You know, even if we don't exactly believe that's true, don't forget that 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 22 tells us to abstain from all appearance of evil. Well, fireworks and other types of noisemakers are common on New Year's Eve, and this tradition was said to originate in China in the 7th century A.D. Fireworks were meant to scare off evil spirits. They were also known to bring prosperity and good luck. Even different designs and colors correspond to various types of luck, including fertility, love, and health. In Denmark, people stand on their chairs and leap into January at midnight to bring good luck and banish spirits. I think I'd be afraid if I jumped off a chair at midnight, my luck might not be so good, especially if I ended up breaking some bones from my fall. But this is what people do. And of course, I think we're all familiar with New Year's Eve parties. I think we're all familiar with that. Well, from the website resolutiondenver.com, history of New Year's Eve, quote, and this is odd, one of the most popular ways to welcome the upcoming year is to make a champagne toast. It originates from Christians' tradition of drinking wine in the Eucharist, symbolizing the blood of Christ. In the Champagne region in France, wine started becoming present during baptisms. Thus, it was slowly being used in any religious gathering. Ancient people would also raise their glass and drink to health and honor. Now, individuals from different parts of the world would make that toast to ring in the new year. End quote. And of course, we have to remember that the new year on the Gregorian calendar is not a holy day sanctioned by God. And not only that, but many just don't drink a simple toast on New Year's Eve. They get plastered, right? 1 Peter 4 verse 3. Let's look at 1 Peter 4 verse 3. Now, actually, according to Time magazine, New Year's Eve is one of the most dangerous holidays of the year due to drunk driving and alcohol-related injuries and deaths. You know, some of us didn't know the truth for much of our lives. I know that many of us have participated in many traditions that we really shouldn't have in the past. But today, we know better. Again, 1 Peter 4 verse 3. I'll be reading this from the Good News Bible. It makes it very clear. 1 Peter 4 verse 3 tells us, you have spent enough time in the past doing what the heathen like to do. Your lives were spent in indecency, lust, drunkenness, orgies, drinking parties, and the disgusting worship of idols. Verse 4, and now the heathen are surprised when you do not join them in the same wild and reckless living, and so they insult you. So why aren't you coming to the party? What's wrong with you? What's wrong? Come to our New Year's Eve party. And, whatever. But again, at one time, we may not have known any better. But as disciples of Christ today, we do. It seems that most of the traditions of New Year's seem to revolve around getting favor from the gods by other gods, by doing things like eating certain foods, making certain promises, kissing the right person. But of course, none of these things have anything to do with the true source of our blessings, the one true God. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 11. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 11. Many of us didn't know why we observe many of the traditions of New Year's Day or New Year's Eve in the past, or even other traditions. I think most of us just followed the crowd, not knowing any better, not knowing what we were doing nor why we're even doing it. But God has called us into his marvelous light and taught us his truth. He's blessed us with understanding. We've learned and we've grown in Jesus Christ, and hopefully we're all maturing spiritually. Hopefully we don't remain as children who lack maturity in Jesus Christ. Again, 1 Corinthians 13:11 tells us, "When I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things." John 4, verse 23, if you would. That's John chapter 4 and verse 23. As we grow and mature in the faith, we do need to give up the childish, the immature things we once did, things we didn't even know why we were doing them. Do we continue to eat certain foods on New Year's Day to obtain blessings from a foreign god? Do we need to kiss someone at midnight? Hopefully the right person. Do we need to kiss someone at midnight to determine our course for the next year? Again, John 4, verse 23. I'm sure you're familiar with it. "But the hour comes, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeks such to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth." If we want to please our true God, how can we avoid doing things that displease him? Well, obviously, keeping God's commandments is a good idea. But what about a tradition we may not be familiar with? How do we avoid participating in something that might actually offend our Creator, something we never want to do? Well, the first thing I'd say might be to always understand why we're doing something. What is the reason for it? If we join the crowd in following a tradition that we don't understand in the first place, then why are we doing this? If it turns out, after our investigation, that we're doing something that God would approve of, great. But if not, things like the worship of false gods and idolatry, then obviously we should refrain. Remember that if we do sin without knowing it, it's still sin. There are even sacrifices in the Old Testament for unintentional sin. But we don't want to sin at all. We want to follow God. And if we truly love God, we never want to do anything that he would consider an abomination. If we really care, if we truly love God and desire to express our love to him, we should always ensure that any tradition we practice is not something God detests, that he considers an abomination, such as following the ways of the heathen. So to conclude today, God has given us a calendar. He's given us his appointed times, his Sabbath days. We use God's calendar to hold our sacred assemblies, to worship him, as we are today, and also for great prophetic understanding. Now, the world has come up with its own calendar. Today, it's pretty much the Gregorian calendar. While this calendar is very accurate, its beginning is basically arbitrary. And we really have to use a Gregorian calendar to function in today's world. But the first day of the year, like many other holidays brings with it pagan beliefs and practices. We should never just do something because we see someone else do it. Everything we do should be to the glory of God. We should never seek the favor of false gods by observing their traditions, and we should not even give the appearance of evil. We should not be participating in wild, drunken parties tomorrow night on New Year's Eve, and we don't need to kiss someone at midnight with the intention of securing our luck for the coming year. And we shouldn't eat deliberately certain foods in believing that we're going to gain favor with some kind of false god and goddess. And tell you what, I don't plan to be jumping off a chair at midnight tomorrow night either. And even if I did, I doubt that would bring me any good luck, just likely a few broken bones. Let's go ahead and turn to Colossians chapter 2, verse 8 to end today. That's Colossians 2, verse 8, and we'll end with this. As I've been saying, if we truly love our God, we never want anything to do with something that would disappoint Him. We never want to be associated with false gods or their worship. We never want to try to gain their favor by doing something that is intended to please them. As always, we should look to the one true God for guidance and for our blessings. Don't allow others to lead us into the ways of the world and the traditions of men. Never try to rationalize something we know deep down is wrong. Loving God and respecting Him always comes first. Again, Colossians 2, verse 8, and we'll end with that. And it tells us what I just said, I think. Beware, lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. So, please have a great rest of the Sabbath day, and if we don't see you following our service today, then we'll see you next year.